I stood behind the velvet curtains of the stage at the opulent five-star hotel in downtown Chicago, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and lingering sorrow. My name is Aaliyah Carter, and at 58 years old, I am the founder and chairwoman of the Carter Hope Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing scholarships and medical care for underprivileged children, especially those from Black communities like the one I grew up in. Tonight was the annual Lifting Tomorrow Gala, an event I had poured my soul into organizing. It was meant to raise funds in memory of my son, Jamal, who had lost his battle with cancer 5 years ago at just 22. Every dollar we collected would go toward helping other families avoid the pain I had endured, turning my personal tragedy into a beacon of hope. The grand ballroom was alive with elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting a warm, shimmering glow over the marble floors. Guests mingled in tuxedos and gowns, politicians from the state senate, CEOs of major corporations, and journalists from national outlets. Soft jazz music floated through the air, played by a live quartet in the corner, mingling with the clink of champagne glasses and murmured conversations about philanthropy and change. I smoothed the fabric of my simple black dress, chosen for its understated grace rather than flashiness. In my hand, I clutched the speech I had rewritten a dozen times, outlining how our foundation had already supported over 200 children with scholarships and medical treatments. This night wasn't just about money, it was about legacy, about proving that one woman's grief could spark systemic good. As the MC, a polished young woman named Elena Ramirez, took the microphone, the room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with a warm smile, "it is my honor to introduce the visionary behind the Carter Hope Foundation, the woman who has turned personal loss into communal triumph, Aaliyah Carter." Applause erupted, a wave of sound that washed over me like encouragement. I took a deep breath, stepping out from the shadows into the spotlight. The bright lights blinded me momentarily, but I focused on the sea of faces below, familiar allies, potential donors, and a few skeptics. This was my moment to inspire, to remind them why we were all here. But as I approached the podium, a sudden commotion shattered the serenity. Doors at the far end of the hall burst open, and 2 police officers stormed in, their flashlights cutting through the dim ambience like accusatory beams. As I reached the podium, the applause still echoing around me, a sharp disturbance ripped through the ballroom. The double doors at the entrance flew open with a bang, and 2 uniformed police officers barreled in, their boots thudding against the marble. Flashlights sliced through the dim lighting, sweeping across faces in the crowd before locking onto me. Whispers turned to gasps, the jazz quartet faltered, notes dying mid-melody. I froze, my hand inches from the microphone, confusion knotting in my stomach. The lead officer, a burly white man in his 40s with a name tag reading Derek Miller, strode directly toward the stage. His partner, a younger Hispanic man who looked uneasy, trailed behind, hand hovering near his radio. Miller's face was set in a grim line, eyes narrowed as if he'd already judged me guilty. He climbed the short steps without hesitation, his voice booming over the stunned silence. "Stop right there. We've got a report of identity fraud and charity scam. You're coming with us for questioning." The room went deathly quiet. I felt a chill race down my spine, the weight of hundreds of eyes pinning me in place. This couldn't be happening, not here, not now. "This is my event," I said evenly, forcing my voice to stay steady despite the rising panic. "You're mistaken. I'm Aaliyah Carter, the host." Miller didn't blink. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt, the metal glinting under the spotlights. "Resisting an officer is a chargeable offense. Hands out, now." Murmurs rippled through the audience, politicians shifting uncomfortably, CEOs exchanging glances, journalists scrambling for their phones. Camera flashes erupted like fireworks, capturing every humiliating second. Elena Ramirez, the MC, stepped forward hesitantly. "Officer, there must be some error. She's our keynote speaker." He ignored her, advancing closer. His breath smelled faintly of coffee as he leaned in, voice low and edged with disdain. "Save the act. We've got tips saying someone's impersonating the real organizer. Move." My mind raced. Who would report this? A rival? A misunderstanding? But I held my ground, refusing to let fear show. The younger officer glanced at the crowd, his expression wavering, but Miller's confidence overpowered any doubt. The elegant atmosphere shattered completely, replaced by raw tension. I sensed the shift in the room, allies turning uncertain, strangers judging. This was no simple mix-up, it felt deliberate, a public takedown. Yet, as he reached for my wrist, I met his gaze without flinching, knowing the truth would surface, eventually. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped around my wrists with a sharp click, biting into my skin just enough to send a jolt of discomfort up my arms. I didn't pull away or protest. Instead, I held Derek Miller's gaze, my expression unchanging even as fury simmered beneath the surface. The ballroom, once a haven of sophistication, now felt like a courtroom where I stood accused without trial. Flashes from journalists' cameras intensified, turning the scene into a spectacle. Guests who moments ago had applauded me now stared in disbelief, senators clutching drinks, executives whispering urgently to spouses, all frozen in a tableau of shock. A murmur spread like wildfire. "Isn't that Aaliyah Carter?" one philanthropist muttered to his companion, his voice carrying over the hush. Another, a prominent businesswoman I'd collaborated with on past initiatives, leaned forward. "Why arrest the event's founder?" Their words hung in the air, a fragile barrier against the unfolding absurdity. Miller yanked me forward, dragging me across the red carpet that symbolized tonight's prestige. His grip tightened unnecessarily, his face flushed with authority. "Quite the nerve," he sneered, loud enough for nearby attendees to hear. "Pretending to own this whole shindig." I kept my tone measured, refusing to let him provoke an outburst. "I'm not pretending. This is my gala." My response echoed slightly in the vast space, drawing more eyes, pity from some, suspicion from others. It pierced me like invisible barbs, those glances, the averted stares of allies I'd invited, the curious scrutiny of strangers weighing my dignity against the officer's badge. One reporter zoomed in with her lens, her expression a mix of intrigue and sympathy, while a state official I'd lobbied for funding stepped back, uncertainty clouding his features. Miller ignored the growing unease, hauling me toward the exit as if parading a trophy. I lifted my chin higher, committing each face to memory, the hesitant nods from supporters, the judgmental tilts from skeptics. Pain from the restraints throbbed, but it paled against the deeper wound, years of building this foundation, honoring Jamal's memory, reduced to this public degradation. Yet, amid the chaos, a quiet resolve anchored me. They would see the truth soon enough. For now, I endured, my steps steady despite the chains. Miller's fingers dug into my arm as he propelled me through the parted crowd, the red carpet now feeling like a path of shame rather than celebration. The ballroom's elegance mocked me, chandeliers twinkling overhead, champagne flutes abandoned on tables, the air thick with expensive perfumes and stunned silence. Faces I recognized blurred past, Senator Harlan, whom I'd lobbied for education reforms, tech mogul Vanessa Klein, a past donor to our pediatric clinics, even the mayor's aide, who'd praised my work at last year's fundraiser. Now, they averted their gazes, stepping aside as if my presence contaminated the space. Whispers escalated into a buzz, sharp and accusing. "Who is she really?" a venture capitalist murmured to his date, his tone laced with doubt. A cluster of journalists huddled nearby, one woman aiming her recorder at us while muttering into it, "Sources suggest this detainee isn't the legitimate Aaliyah Carter." Her words sliced through me, twisting the knife of betrayal. How could they question me so easily? I'd built this foundation from nothing, channeling Jamal's memory into tangible aid for countless families. Even the event staff contributed to the erosion. A young security guard in a crisp black suit shook his head disapprovingly as we passed. "Her name isn't on the speaker roster." Must be an infiltrator trying to scam the bigwigs. His assumption fueled Miller's arrogance. He smirked, leaning close enough for me to catch his smug breath. See? Even your own team doesn't vouch for you. Pain surged in my chest, not from his hold, but from the unraveling of trust I'd cultivated over decades. These people knew my story, the widow who turned grief into grants, the advocate who'd secured millions for underserved kids. Yet here, reduced to a suspect, I felt invisible in my own domain. I remained silent, swallowing the urge to defend myself. Defiance might escalate things, confirm their biases. Instead, I scanned the room, noting the hesitant expressions on a few allies, a board member's furrowed brow, a volunteer's wide-eyed concern. But most retreated into skepticism, their body language screaming judgment. The humiliation burned, a reminder of how fragile respect could be for someone like me. Still, I straightened my posture, drawing strength from Jamal's legacy. They would learn soon, for now, endurance was my weapon. As Miller shoved me toward a side door leading to a makeshift holding area, a dimly lit conference room repurposed for security, the murmurs from the main hall faded into an oppressive quiet. My wrists ached from the restraints, but I focused on steadying my breath, channeling the calm I'd honed through years of boardroom battles and courtroom advocacy for underfunded schools. This wasn't my first encounter with doubt, but the scale of it here, amid my own creation, stung deeper than any prior slight. We crossed the threshold, the door clicking shut behind us, sealing off the prying eyes. The younger officer, whose badge read Luis Ramirez, fidgeted with his utility belt, his face betraying a flicker of uncertainty. Miller released my arm with a rough push, positioning me against a wall lined with stacked chairs. He crossed his arms, exuding overconfidence. "Sit tight while we sort this mess," he barked, his tone dripping with dismissal. I met his stare, my voice low but unwavering. "What if you're wrong? If I am truly Aaliyah Carter, consider the fallout from this." He burst into laughter, a harsh bark that echoed off the bare walls. "If you're Carter, then I'm the governor himself. Spare me the bluff, folks like you thrive on intimidation tactics." His words landed like a slap, laced with unspoken prejudice, reducing my decades of achievement to a stereotype. Ramirez shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. "Boss, that name rings a bell. I think I've seen articles about her foundation, something about major grants for kids' healthcare." Miller waved him off dismissively, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Don't fall for it, kid. She's spinning tales to buy time. We've handled phonies before, this one's no different." Ramirez nodded reluctantly, but his eyes darted to me, a seed of doubt planted. I held my tongue, letting the moment stretch, the air heavy with unspoken tension. My mind raced through contingencies, contacts in the State House, media allies, but I refused to beg. Instead, I observed them, Miller's smug posture, Ramirez's subtle hesitation. This charade wouldn't last. Truth had a way of emerging, especially when underestimated. For now, I endured, drawing quiet strength from the knowledge that my foundation's impact far outshone this fleeting indignity. In that tense standoff, the restraints shifted slightly as I adjusted my stance against the wall, exposing the slim gold bracelet on my left wrist. It caught the dim overhead light, the engraved Lifting Tomorrow Foundation emblem gleaming subtly, a custom piece awarded only to founders like me during our inaugural ceremony 3 years ago. Ramirez's eyes widened instantly, locking onto it with recognition. He leaned forward, voice hesitant but insistent. "Chief, look at that bracelet. I've spotted it in news clips. It's exclusive to the organization's top brass." Miller glanced over dismissively, his brow furrowing for a split second before he snorted. "Counterfeit junk. Online shops peddle replicas by the dozen." But his dismissal hung awkwardly in the air, failing to quell the spark of intrigue in Ramirez's expression. The younger man pulled out his phone, fingers tapping rapidly as he muttered, "Let me double-check something quick." Outside the door, the hallway buzzed with escalating voices from lingering guests and staff. I heard fragments, a board member's urgent whisper, "Hold on, pull up the foundation's site, her photo matches exactly." Footsteps approached, and through the partially open entrance, I glimpsed a cluster forming, event coordinators huddled over devices, their faces illuminated by screens. One woman, a volunteer coordinator I'd trained personally, gasped audibly, "That's her profile right here. Aaliyah Carter, no doubt." The shift was palpable, a ripple of realization spreading like electricity. Miller noticed too, his posture stiffening as he barked toward the doorway, "Back off, folks. This is official business, mind your own." But his command lacked its earlier bite, edged with irritation that betrayed unease. Ramirez pocketed his phone, shooting me a sidelong glance filled with growing hesitation. "Sir, the images line up. And that emblem, it's not something you'd fake easily." I remained composed, feeling the tide turn subtly in my favor. The bracelet, a symbol of my tireless efforts, now served as an unintended beacon. Whispers intensified, "If she's legitimate, this is a massive blunder." My pulse quickened not from fear, but from a quiet vindication. Years of advocacy, of transforming pain into purpose, couldn't be erased by one misguided intrusion. Miller paced, his confidence cracking under the weight of emerging scrutiny, while I waited, knowing clarity was imminent. Miller tightened his grip on my arm, his fingers pressing harder as if to assert dominance in the confined space. He steered me toward the rear exit of the conference room, his strides purposeful and aggressive. The air grew thicker with anticipation, the distant hum from the hallway amplifying my heightened senses. Ramirez trailed us, his earlier doubt now manifesting in hurried glances at his superior. "We're taking her in," Miller announced into his radio, his voice clipped and authoritative. "Suspect in custody for impersonation, requesting backup for transport to the station." A soft knock interrupted, and the door creaked open. An event organizer, a middle-aged man with a clipboard clutched tightly, poked his head in cautiously. His face was pale, eyes darting between me and the officers. "Excuse me, officers. I believe there's a mistake here. I just verified on our official site, her picture is there, listed as the founder." Miller whirled on him, his expression darkening with irritation. "You've been duped, pal. Scammers like her whip up fakes with basic editing software." He dismissed the man with a curt wave, but the organizer lingered, his stance firmer. "No, sir, it's the secure database. And witnesses are confirming it outside." The exchange fueled a surge in activity beyond the walls. I heard the rapid tapping of keyboards and muffled exclamations, reporters activating their devices. One voice rose clearer, a journalist's urgent narration into her livestream. "Viewers, we're witnessing a potential wrongful detention at the Lifting Tomorrow Gala. The woman in cuffs bears a striking resemblance to Aaliyah Carter herself." Comments flooded inaudibly from her feed, "That's her. Check the Foundation's awards page. This looks bad for the cops." My heart raced, not from terror, but from a righteous indignation swelling within. How dare they reduce my life's work to this farce? Miller's face reddened, his composure fraying. He barked into the radio again, "Make it quick, media swarming." Ramirez interjected softly, "Maybe we should confirm her ID properly before escalating." But Miller shot him a glare, "Follow protocol, or step aside." The pressure mounted, the room feeling smaller as footsteps multiplied outside. I sensed the impending storm, the truth clawing its way to the surface amid the chaos. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy, allowing their errors to compound. The organizer retreated but left the door ajar, inviting more scrutiny. Whispers evolved into demands, "Release her if it's a mix-up." The injustice fueled my resolve, a quiet fire igniting as the situation teetered on the brink of explosion. The door to the holding room swung wider as the organizer's words hung unresolved, drawing more figures into the fray. A poised woman in her mid-40s, clad in a shimmering evening gown, pushed through the growing cluster. I recognized her immediately, Attorney Lila Thompson, a fierce civil rights advocate who'd partnered with my foundation on legal aid for foster youth. Her heels clicked assertively on the tile as she approached, her expression a blend of outrage and determination. "Pardon the interruption, officers," she said firmly, "but I've collaborated with this woman on the pediatric hospital opening just last week." "Are you certain this isn't an error?" Miller pivoted toward her, his jaw clenching in visible annoyance. He sized her up with a skeptical sweep, his tone laced with condescension. "And who might you be? An accomplice to the charade?" Thompson didn't flinch, holding up her event badge. "I'm Lila Thompson, Esquire. I've seen her credentials firsthand, board meetings, grant signings. This reeks of profiling." Her intervention ignited the assembly outside. Guests who'd lingered in the corridor now blocked the pathway, their murmurs coalescing into bolder assertions. A tech entrepreneur I'd funded for STEM programs in schools stepped forward. "Check that bracelet again, it's the foundation's insignia. I received a similar one for donors." Another voice, from a city council member, "I've attended her keynotes. This doesn't add up." The crowd swelled, phones aloft, capturing the standoff. I felt the atmosphere charge, a collective unease morphing into advocacy, the pity I'd sensed earlier giving way to solidarity. Miller's frustration boiled over, his face reddening further. He raised a hand to ward them off. "Clear the area. This is law enforcement procedure, interference could land you in trouble." But his command faltered amid the pushback. Ramirez tugged at his sleeve. "Maybe we pause and verify, sir." The crowd's turning. Thompson pressed on, "If you're wrong, this could spark a lawsuit bigger than your department's budget." I observed it all from my spot against the wall, a quiet satisfaction blooming amid the turmoil. Their voices, once distant whispers, now formed a shield around me. The shift was tangible, from isolated humiliation to communal questioning. A reporter in the throng called out, "Is this racial bias at play?" The query hung heavy, amplifying the scrutiny. Miller barked orders into his radio again, but the clamor drowned him out. My resolve hardened. This wasn't just my vindication, it exposed the fragility of assumptions. The hallway pulsed with unrest, the truth inching closer with every defiant word. I lifted my head slowly, the weight of the moment pressing on me like an invisible force. The hallway outside the room had transformed into a chaotic arena, with guests and staff forming a human barrier, their faces a mosaic of confusion and burgeoning anger. Lila Thompson stood firm, her arms crossed, while Miller's radio crackled with incoming static. "Backup en route," he claimed. Ramirez hovered nearby, his loyalty visibly fracturing under the onslaught of questions. The air hummed with urgency, punctuated by the incessant beeps of notifications on phones as the live stream gained traction. Enough was enough. I drew a steady breath, channeling the poise I'd cultivated through countless fundraisers and negotiations. My voice emerged clear and resolute, cutting through the din without needing volume. "You've just detained the founder of this charity event. And over $80 million in grants are pending my approval tonight." The words landed like a thunderclap in a storm, silencing the corridor instantly. Miller's head snapped toward me, his complexion draining to a ghostly pallor. His mouth opened, but no sound escaped at first, only a stammered, What did you say?" His hand, still clutching my elbow, loosened involuntarily, as if scalded. The crowd inhaled collectively, a vacuum of breath that amplified the echo of my statement. Thompson's eyes widened in triumph, her nod subtle but affirming. A council member in the throng muttered, "$80 million? That matches the foundation's annual pledge." Whispers erupted anew, but sharper now, accusations flipping toward the officers. How could they botch this? "Call the press conference off, this is a scandal." Ramirez backed away a step, his gaze flicking to his partner in alarm. "Sir, if that's accurate." Miller recovered marginally, his voice strained. "Bluffing won't save you." "Prove it." But the doubt in his tone betrayed him, cracking the facade of certainty he'd worn like armor. I felt a surge of quiet power, the injustice fueling a clarity that pierced the haze of degradation. My statement wasn't a threat, it was fact, rooted in the empire I'd built from ashes, Jamal's legacy woven into every dollar, every life touched. The atmosphere thickened, tension coiling tighter as more people crowded in. A donor I'd personally recruited stepped closer. "I've wired funds to her organization." "This is outrageous." Miller's radio buzzed again, but he ignored it, sweat beading on his forehead. In that frozen instant, I locked eyes with him, my composure unyielding. The balance had shifted, no longer the accused, I embodied the reckoning. The hallway pulsed with anticipation, the truth unraveling threads of deception one revelation at a time. Barely 2 minutes after my declaration echoed through the corridor, a distant wail of sirens pierced the charged atmosphere. The crowd parted instinctively as flashing lights danced across the walls from the front entrance. A convoy of official vehicles screeched to a halt outside, doors slamming in rapid succession. Footsteps thundered down the hall, purposeful, authoritative. I straightened against the wall, sensing the pivot in momentum, my pulse steadying with anticipation. The door burst open wider, admitting a tall man in his early 50s, dressed in a navy suit with a state seal pin glinting on his lapel. I knew him well, Director Elias Grant, head of the State Attorney General's office, a key collaborator on our foundation's initiatives for juvenile justice reform. He'd been invited as a guest of honor tonight, his presence meant to underscore our partnerships. Grant's sharp eyes scanned the scene, landing on me with immediate recognition. His jaw tightened, brows furrowing in controlled fury. "Is she under restraint?" he demanded, his voice resonant and unyielding, cutting through the residual murmurs like a blade. Miller stiffened, releasing my arm abruptly as if it burned him. He straightened his uniform, attempting to reclaim composure. "Yes, Director. Suspected of false identity. We received a tip-off." Grant strode forward, ignoring Miller's explanation. His entourage, 2 aides and a uniformed escort, flanked him, notebooks at the ready. He stopped inches from us, his gaze shifting to Ramirez, who shrank back slightly. "And you proceeded without verification?" Grant's tone dripped with disapproval, his presence commanding the room's focus. Ramirez stammered, "We were about to, sir, but—" "Save it," Grant interrupted, turning to one of his assistants, a young woman with a tablet in hand. "Pull up the Foundation's registry. And you," he pointed at Ramirez, "fetch her identification badge immediately." Miller hesitated, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Director, protocol requires." "Protocol?" Grant snapped, his voice rising just enough to echo. "You've manhandled a pillar of this community based on an anonymous claim?" "I've signed off on her grants personally, $80 million in state-matched funds for child welfare programs." The crowd gasped audibly, phones capturing every word. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, mingled with quiet triumph. Grant's intervention wasn't mere chance, it was the network I'd nurtured coming full circle. The assistant nodded briskly, her fingers flying across the screen. "Confirmed, sir. Aaliyah Carter, founder. Photo and bio match." Grant's eyes met mine, a nod of solidarity passing between us. The tide had turned irrevocably. Grant's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s named Sophia Reyes, nodded briskly and swiped through her tablet with practiced efficiency. The screen's glow illuminated her focused expression as she cross-referenced databases. "Accessing the Foundation's verified records now," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs. I watched, my heart a steady drumbeat, as the pieces aligned, the culmination of this ordeal hinging on irrefutable proof. Seconds later, she held up the device for all to see. My official profile filled the display, a recent photo from our last board meeting, my full title emblazoned in bold, Aaliyah Carter, founder and chairwoman of the Carter Hope Foundation. But Grant wasn't satisfied with digital evidence alone. He gestured toward my chest, where the small name badge I'd pinned earlier that evening dangled slightly askew from the scuffle. "Show them that," he instructed Ramirez, who hesitated before stepping forward gingerly. The young officer unclipped it carefully, his fingers trembling as he raised it high. The laminated card caught the light. "Aaliyah Carter, founder and chairwoman, Carter Hope Foundation." Gasps rippled through the assembled onlookers, donors clutching programs, journalists zooming lenses, staff members exchanging wide-eyed glances. "Good Lord, it's her," a venture philanthropist exclaimed, his voice breaking the hush. "We've funded her projects for years." Thompson, the attorney, folded her arms with a satisfied nod. "Told you, this is a travesty." The revelation cascaded like dominoes. A city official I'd partnered with on community health initiatives pushed through. I vetted her grants personally. "Release her immediately." Phones buzzed with notifications as the livestream comments exploded, viewers demanding accountability, hashtags forming in real time. Miller's face crumpled, color fleeing as realization dawned. He fumbled with the key, unlocking the restraints with unsteady hands. The metal released with a soft clink, and I rubbed my wrists, feeling circulation return alongside a surge of liberation. "I didn't realize," Miller muttered, his bravado shattered, eyes darting everywhere but mine. The tip seemed solid. We followed procedure. Ramirez backed away, mumbling apologies under his breath. Grant stepped closer, his presence towering. "Procedure? You've humiliated a state-honored philanthropist on baseless grounds." The corridor erupted in chatter, reporters narrating feverishly. "Breaking, wrongful detention at charity Gala confirmed." I stood taller, the weight lifting, my foundation's integrity reaffirmed in this public arena. The truth, once obscured, now blazed undeniable, exposing the flaws in their hasty judgment. Grant's words hung heavy, his authority amplifying the room's shifting dynamics. Miller's shoulders slumped, the bravado that had fueled his actions evaporating like mist under sunlight. He averted his eyes, fumbling with his belt as if seeking solace in routine. "I followed the report," he mumbled, his voice cracking, devoid of its earlier edge. Sweat glistened on his brow, betraying the panic surging beneath. Thompson stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "You assumed because she didn't fit your profile of power?" Her question sliced through, echoing the unspoken biases that had ignited this fiasco. Grant nodded in agreement, his tone measured but stern. "Exactly. You targeted a respected leader on flimsy grounds, ignoring basic due diligence." The corridor filled with affirming nods, donors murmuring assent, a journalist jotting notes furiously. Ramirez distanced himself subtly, his face etched with regret, whispering to no one, "We should have checked sooner." Miller's facade crumbled further. He raised a hand in feeble defense. "The anonymous call detailed everything, said she was an imposter siphoning funds." But his excuse rang hollow, drowned by the growing chorus of disapproval. A foundation volunteer, emboldened, chimed in, "You've tarnished an evening meant for healing. Her work saved my niece's life through those medical grants." The weight of collective judgment pressed on him, his uniform suddenly seeming ill-fitting, a symbol of misused trust. I watched his downfall unfold, a mix of sorrow and resolve stirring within me. This man, who had wielded his position like a weapon, now stood exposed, vulnerable, diminished. Grant turned to him directly. "You'll face an internal review. This isn't just a slip, it's systemic failure." Miller nodded numbly, his posture defeated, eyes glazing with the realization of consequences, potential suspension, public scrutiny, a career teetering. Finally, I spoke, my words deliberate and calm, cutting through the tension. "I don't require your apology. What I need is for you to learn how to treat people with basic humanity." My statement landed softly yet profoundly, eliciting nods from the onlookers. Miller met my gaze briefly, his expression a tumult of shame and defeat, no retort, just silent acknowledgement. He backed away, the crowd parting not out of respect, but disdain. In that moment, vindication coursed through me, not vengeance, but affirmation. My foundation's mission, born from loss, endured stronger. The incident, though painful, spotlighted deeper issues, sparking conversations that rippled outward. As the sirens faded and order restored, I felt Jamal's spirit guiding me forward, unbroken. As the echoes of Grant's reprimand faded, I gathered my composure, retrieving my modest handbag from where it had fallen during the scuffle. The corridor, once a battleground of accusations, now parted silently for me, a sea of faces etched with remorse and awkward relief. I walked steadily, the click of my heels resounding on the tile, each step reclaiming the ground I'd lost. No one dared speak, their eyes followed me, a mix of admiration and guilt replacing earlier doubt. The grand ballroom loomed ahead, its doors still ajar, spilling golden light into the hall. I paused at the threshold, glancing back at the disheveled scene, Miller slouched against the wall, Ramirez avoiding gazes, Grant issuing quiet directives to his team. This space, meant for inspiration and unity, had become a stage for my trial. Yet, emerging from it felt like shedding chains, not just the physical ones, but the invisible burdens of prejudice I'd carried far too long. Pushing through, I traversed the now hushed venue. Tables stood abandoned, half-empty glasses reflecting the subdued chandeliers. A few lingering guests rose as I passed, offering tentative nods or murmured support, "We're with you, Ms. Carter." I acknowledged them faintly, my focus turning outward. At the main entrance, the young reception director, a polite man in his late 20s named Marcus Hale, approached hesitantly, his uniform crisp but his expression crumpled. "Miss Carter, I'm deeply sorry," he said, bowing his head slightly. "I failed to intervene sooner. This shouldn't have happened." I met his eyes, seeing genuine contrition amid the formality. "No need for more regrets," I replied softly, placing a hand on his arm briefly. "Just ensure it doesn't repeat, for anyone." He nodded vigorously, stepping aside as I proceeded. Outside, Chicago's night enveloped me, the cool breeze carrying hints of lake water and distant traffic. Skyscrapers twinkled like distant stars, the city alive despite the hour. Freedom surged through me, mingled with a lingering ache, the sting of public scrutiny, the reminder of vulnerabilities even success couldn't shield. Jamal's face flashed in my mind, urging perseverance. The gala would resume, funds would flow, but this evening had etched a deeper purpose, exposing cracks in the system, fostering change. I hailed a cab, ready to move forward, unbroken. Hours ticked by after I left the venue, the city's rhythm carrying me homeward in the cab's quiet confines. By then, the footage had exploded across social media, clips of my detainment circulating like wildfire, tagged with outrage and calls for justice. Hashtags proliferated, #Justice for Carter, #End Bias Now. My phone vibrated incessantly with notifications from supporters, journalists seeking statements, even strangers sharing personal tales of similar indignities. The incident, meant to diminish me, instead amplified the Foundation's reach, drawing attention to the very inequalities we'd fought against. That night, as I settled into my living room with a cup of chamomile tea, I flipped on the late news broadcast. The anchor, a seasoned reporter named Carla Jennings, led with the story, "Breaking developments from tonight's Lifting Tomorrow Gala, a case of mistaken identity turned public reckoning." She detailed the chaos, showing edited snippets of the confrontation, my composed demeanor contrasting Miller's aggression. Then, she transitioned to an interview clip with a young volunteer who'd witnessed it all. The screen cut to her, a bright-eyed woman in her early 20s, still in her event uniform, speaking earnestly into the camera. "I always saw Ms. Carter as approachable, unassuming," she began, her voice steady despite evident emotion. "But watching her in those cuffs, facing that ordeal without raising her voice or lashing out, it was profound." She uttered one line that silenced everyone, revealing the truth without drama. "That moment taught me, true strength doesn't demand proof through fury, it shines through unwavering dignity." Her words resonated deeply, a balm to the evening's wounds. I leaned back, reflecting on how the stranger captured the essence I'd strived to embody: resilience forged in adversity, a quiet force against systemic slights. The broadcast continued, analysts discussing broader implications, departmental reviews, bias training mandates. Calls flooded in for accountability, petitions gaining signatures by the minute. In that reflection, Jamal's memory felt closer, his spirit affirming my path. The volunteers' insight wasn't just commentary, it mirrored the change we'd sparked, proving one act of grace could ripple into transformation. A week later, I returned to the conference center where the gala had unfolded, drawn by an invitation from the management for a private follow-up. The hallway leading to the main ballroom felt different now, polished floors echoing my footsteps, the air carrying a faint scent of fresh polish rather than the charged tension of that night. Staff nodded respectfully as I passed, their expressions a blend of deference and subtle apology. I hadn't come for reconciliation. Curiosity pulled me, whispers of a new installation reaching me through foundation channels. In the grand foyer, where guests had once mingled oblivious to the drama, a framed photograph now hung prominently on the wall. It captured that pivotal moment, me standing resolute before Miller, my features serene yet unyielding, eyes locked on his with quiet intensity. The image froze the instant before the reversal, cuffs visible, crowd blurred in the background, my posture embodying unbroken poise. Below it, etched on a brass plaque, read the inscription: "She didn't need to shout for respect. She simply was herself." I stood there, absorbing it, a soft warmth spreading through me. The photo wasn't just a memento, it symbolized the shift we'd ignited. Inquiries had poured in, donations surging by 30%, partnerships proposals from across the state. Media outlets dissected the event, sparking dialogues on implicit biases and authority. Miller faced suspension, his department mandating retraining. Ramirez, reportedly, sought transfer, haunted by the misstep. Touching the frame gently, I reflected on Jamal. This wasn't vengeance, it was evolution, his legacy expanding through unintended exposure. Strangers messaged me daily, "Your grace inspired me to speak up." A young black entrepreneur shared, "Seeing you hold firm reminded me to claim my space." The plaque's words resonated deepest, my mantra, forged in trials, now a beacon for others. As I departed, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows that danced across the image. Chicago bustled outside, indifferent yet transformed in subtle ways. I stepped into the day, carrying forward, not as a victim, but as a catalyst. The foundation thrived, grants flowing to more families, proving one evening's turmoil could birth enduring light.